bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Well, Fade to Black. Bespoke Radio. That's right. For the masses. Yeah, man. Some things I just love to say. Today's Thursday, August 24th. 235 days into the new year, just 130 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States, hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black. Now, for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet, I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Tonight we have a very special guest with us. He's back. I miss him too. Ralph Ellis is here, live from Europe. Yes, we are going to rewrite history once again on Fade to Black right here. The very best, man. Ralph Ellis. We're going to do a little Garden of Eden tonight. We're going to do some Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden. And we're going to somehow, as only Ralph can do it, we're going to connect the dots to King Solomon and Snow White. That's right. That's how we're going to. That's only Ralph Ellis can pull that off, right? And, of course, opening up the show tonight, because it is Thursday, Jon Rappoport is going to be here with us, No More Fake Newsroom live. And he's actually going to be here in 5 minutes. Okay? So, and he's going to take us all the way to the bottom of the hour. And then Ralph Ellis will be here. So, there you go. I'm going to try and squeeze in some phone calls tonight. So, we'll do that, too, as well. Allison. Look at the Allison Woman Cave. That's what I'm talking about right there. You know what? I'm going to save this image right here. I'm stealing it. Thank you, Allison. Allison's Woman Cave right there. Woman Cave. That's what I'm talking about. Look at that. Man, she's got it going on. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. And you can check out Allison's pic right there. At JChurchRadio, hashtag F2B is the sandbox. What is up with all of the dancing cats tonight? Yeah, okay. Follow us on Twitter, at JChurchRadio. Use YouTube, Facebook, everything is Fade to Black, JChurchRadio. I think our official YouTube channel is now Fade to Black Radio Official. So that's what that is over there. The sandbox, as I just said, is hashtag F2B. On Twitter, we do have a couple of chat rooms over at KGRA or Spreaker. And there you go. Everything is interactive, and we follow. Now, this is the deal. I've noticed this with this new software that we're running. My chat room for Spreaker stops at like 500 posts. You know, so like a third of the way through the show, it just stops. and, I'm running different software than you guys are running. And I'm totally bummed, So I look down and I'm wanting to interact, and I can't. It's froze. It stops. It just stops right there, about a third of the way through the show. So, all right. Email throughout the show, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Very simple. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We have over 700 archive shows, custom apps, Apple, Android. Very simple. Just $2 a month. Just go over to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the podcast banner, or you can become a member. You can become a Fadernaut in our membership area. You can do both. It doesn't matter. You can do both. And becoming a Fadernaut is easy. It's safe. It's secure. It's all the way from free to full-blown game changer, where you're going to get an autographed hat and T-shirts and all of that stuff. And so there you go. All right. So become a member today and become an official Fadernaut. You also get a secret email, right? A secret email to me. Yeah. And I reply to everyone. Well, yeah, I think so. I think I've replied to everyone. If I haven't, it's a day later, but I try to do it the same day. Don't forget to visit all of our sponsors, Life Change Tea, GetTheTea.com, Rivermoon Coffee, New Pharma, that's GNU Pharma, Ancient Life Oil, Sacred Skulls, and Studio Dome Speakers. Sacred Skulls, man. Hoo-fa. Studio Dome Speakers. We have the best sponsors anywhere. Life Change Tea. You've got to get the Life Change Tea, Super Strength Tea. You've got to get it. Everybody, not only on the Fade to Black crew, but all of our friends and family, everybody is on that program. You should just drink the tea every single day. That's it. You will have no varmints living in your body. And I do mean that. That is not a joke. That is not a joke. Our happy birthday to today, Dave Chappelle is 44. Our dead guy's birthday today, Kenny Baker, 1934, 2016, played R2-D2 in Star Wars. On this day in history, OTD, in the year 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupts. Fader fact, 18.3% of Iceland's population, are you ready? Listen to this. 18.3% of Iceland's population smokes weed. That's right, placing Iceland at the top. They are the number one marijuana-consuming nation in the world. And that is a Fader fact. All right. The No More Fake Newsroom is our favorite thing every Thursday night. Normally, Jon Rappoport is with us at the bottom of the hour, but tonight we have Ralph Ellis live from Europe. So we're going to bring in Jon right now. And this is the deal. Without the fanfare, without the crazy intro, without all of that stuff, I'm just going to say, Jon, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
Thank you, Jimmy. Here we go, folks.
Hold on, Jon. Let me at least give you this, okay?
All right.
Take it away, Jon.
All right. I will take it away. I was debating between a couple of stories here. You might check out at No More Fake News a story on fake evidence used in the Oklahoma bombing of 1995. Went into the archive and came up with mainstream news articles on how the FBI evidence lab cooked the evidence in the bombing in Oklahoma City, the Murrah Federal Building in 1995. And therefore, by distorting, cooking, making wrong assumptions based on no evidence, limited the scope of the investigation into other suspects. Very interesting stuff. But tonight, instead, I've decided to go with this. I've talked about this many times on the show here. The medical cartel is the best protected cartel in the world. The best protected by media, by government, by foundations, by people in high positions of power. Protected from exposure, that is. Deep exposure as to their crimes. So I ran an article called WikiLeaks leak this. And the reason that I did that is because, as I've written before, prominent websites like WikiLeaks, and there are others, who take documents that are sent to them, documents exposing tremendous scandals, national security type scandals, warmongering scandals, CIA scandals, email server scandals, you name it. They've got it, and they release it, and they publish it, and major media pick up on it, even though major media now have turned on WikiLeaks. But go to WikiLeaks and see if you can find any leaks of any substance in the form of documents, memos, testimony from insiders about gigantic medical scandals. Go to their search function, type in various wordings, and see what you can find. I dare you. You're going to find almost nothing. Why is that? Because the medical cartel is the best protected cartel in the world, protected from exposure. And in the article, specifically that I wrote, WikiLeaks leaked this, which has gotten around. It's been published not only on my website, sent out to my list, but sent out to other large websites. And my stories tend to get picked up by people I don't even know, and they publish them and so forth and so on. And yet, nothing. Here's what I specifically cited, and regular listeners will have heard this before. July 26, 2000, Journal of the American Medical Association. The review was called, "Is U.S. Health Really the Best in the World?" And the author was Dr. Barbara Starfield, who died, I'm going to say 4 years ago, perhaps now, who at the time was not only a respected but revered public health expert at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. So everybody's credentials up and down the line were not only mainstream, but elite mainstream. And in her review, she concluded the following, that every year in the U.S., the medical system kills 225,000 people. That would be, if you take it out to a decade, 2.25 million deaths at the hands of the medical system in America. Now, if that ain't a story, nothing is a story. And there was a brief flurry in the year 2000. At the time the study came out in the press, and then it died away, and it's not appeared since then. I interviewed Dr. Starfield in 2009, and she told me that this estimate of hers was a conservative estimate, that other studies have shown higher death figures, and we're not even getting into the millions of annual, what shall we call it, maimings that make people extremely debilitated, unable to work, unable to care for others, etc., etc. We're not even getting into that. So this would be, by any half-sane standard, a gigantic story that would require years of ongoing investigation by the press, by the government itself, and remedies and fixes and all of that. Nothing. Nothing. You won't find that story, the last time I looked, on WikiLeaks. Why not? Why don't they pick it up? Why don't they do something with it? What are they afraid of? That's a really good question. What are they afraid of? Are they afraid that the source is somehow incorrect? No, well, you could say that about any source, but here again, it's completely mainstream. It's completely elite mainstream. And Starfield breaks it down 106,000 deaths per year caused by FDA-approved medicines, approved as safe and effective, correctly prescribed. The other 119,000 deaths per year due to errors and mistreatment in hospitals. That's how she arrives at her figure. Protection and fear. In the case of some media outlets, they fear that the other stories that they cover that they believe have credibility would somehow be cast into grave doubt if they would go with this story, because there is such incredible brainwashing around how wonderful the medical cartel is and how wonderful medical treatment is, that they would face a storm of protest if they published the story that I'm talking about, and then it would throw all their other articles into doubt. So that's some pretty elite brainwashing, wouldn't you think? For some media outlet, even certain independent media outlets, to draw that conclusion. Well, we don't want to mess with this story. This is now getting into territory that's really too iffy, and boy, I mean, forget about the blowback that we face for publishing other kinds of articles. If we published this, we would have a storm on our hands. And so they don't. The medical cartel is the best protected cartel in the world. You can look for conspiracies high and low, and deep and far, and they exist. But this one is right here, right out in the open, right there for everybody to see. And the mortality numbers are right there, right in the open for anybody to see. And not only does the mainstream press not pick up on this, but certain independent media outlets also refuse to pick up on it. The medical cartel is the best protected cartel in the world. So this should tell you something. Because what happens in a country like the United States when a system can get away with killing 2.25 million people per decade without any consequences, and wounding and maiming millions more, millions upon millions, with no consequences. This tells you that this is an ongoing operation of some kind whose effects I've just been describing to you. Year after year after year after year. And what does this do to a country? It eats it out from the inside. It makes people unable to function. It actually kills people. It creates huge emotional turmoil, focusing around all of the relatives and the friends and the co-workers of the people who die, whose deaths are never attributed to medical treatment itself, creating a mystery, a question that is never answered for the families. That is a effect that you would have to call major, don't you think? Major as in major, major, major? And yet, nothing. And I'm not trying to, call out WikiLeaks, because I think they do some very good work. No question about it. There are other such sites, as I say, who specialize in documents, memos from insiders. Where are the medical insiders who should be leaking all kinds of information about what's going on in their government agencies and their pharmaceutical corporations and even in their medical schools? Where are they? As I've talked about on this show before, where is the medical Edward Snowden? who comes out of the dark, out of the closet, with a load full of documents that reveal horrendous things that are happening, this time in the medical arena, and says, here they are, boys and girls. Here are the documents that prove collusion, bribes, payoffs, all kinds of stuff, in order to approve drugs, medical drugs, in order to sustain the kind of destructive medical practices that remain in effect in this country and all over the world. Where is such a person? I don't know the people, but I know of a few people who are there, who could be such leakers. But thus far, all I see is statements, anonymously made statements that, yes, they're aware of corruption and so, but I haven't seen the goods. Let's have the goods. Get it out there. Expose what's really going on. Let's not forget that medical personnel that are intimately involved with human life and death and patients take an oath to do no harm, to care above all for the safety and health of their patients. And that oath you put up against various non-disclosure agreements that they sign when they go to work for certain agencies and so on and so forth. But what are all those non-disclosure agreements about? When you think about it, why would you have, if you work, say, at the FDA, non-disclosure agreements? Well, one of the reasons is because that agency doesn't want people talking out of school about what happens in meetings when there are arguments about which drugs to approve for human use and which to deny, and who's getting paid off for what, or who's colluding with which pharmaceutical company, or who is basically owned by some pharmaceutical company who actually works within the government. That's what I'm talking about. Where is such a person? Where are those people? You've heard me talk, and in fact, recently, about the film Vaxxed and its triumphs and successes and the opposition to it. Well, what is that film about? That film is about one man, William Thompson, a 15-year, roughly, researcher, insider at the Centers for Disease Control, who made a public confession in August of 2014 on his whistleblower lawyer's website. Rick Morgan is the lawyer in Cincinnati. It was published. Thompson admitted that he and his colleagues violated the protocol on the study of the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella. And by violating the protocol, he means they omitted certain data on purpose that would have shown that the vaccine causes an increased risk for autism in children. By omitting the data, they were able to conclude falsely that the vaccine did not increase the risk of autism. That's what that film is about. That's one whistleblower. Just one. Who went into a kind of hiding after that and refused to speak with the press for any reason whatsoever. Said he would not speak publicly. He would only work with members of Congress if there was ever a public hearing about this, an investigation. Well, there isn't any. And he surely knew, I would say, that there wouldn't be one. So he is in silence completely now. That's it. There are many such William Thompsons within the medical cartel who know the truth. And like Thompson, which you will see and hear, actually, if you watch the film Vaxxed, a man torn by his own conscience, who has contributed to the maiming and perhaps even the death toll by his fraud, and reached a point when he couldn't do that any further. How many of those people do you think, given what I started to say here at the top about this review in the Journal of the American Medical Association, killing 2.25 million people every decade, therefore, how many people inside the medical cartel do you think there are who have agonized consciences and are torn between their careers, their paychecks, their status, the friendship of their peers, etc., etc.? Between that and coming clean and admitting what they know about what really goes on to produce that death figure every year like clockwork. Because, my friends, something goes on to make that happen. Something chronic, ongoing, deep, corrupt, perverted, in order for that death toll to keep on ringing year after year, decade after decade. How many people are contributing to that in the innards of the medical system, who know the truth and will not speak it? Will not speak it. The medical cartel is the best protected cartel in the world. That's a message that needs to be understood. These are facts that need to be broadcast and understood by people all over the world. The story needs to come to light and be exposed widely to the public so that the public understands what is happening to it on a regular basis. And then we will begin to see the crumbling of this facade and front and mask of authority when somebody medical with a title after his name appears in the media and makes a statement that is never questioned. Then we will see all of that crumble. And that is my report for tonight.
And that's why you are on this show, John. Let me say this. I've got 15 seconds. Just like the crack dealers driving the fancy cars in the 80s, right? Today, the creepiest person on the planet is the big pharma sales rep driving the Mercedes wearing the cologne. You know what I mean? Drug dealers. Think about that in the legal sense and legally. John, thank you for everything that you do, my friend. You are the absolute very best.
You too, Jimmy. Thank you so much.
And we'll see you next Thursday. Jon Rappoport. Start off every day at nomorefakenews.com. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow Jon Rappoport at Jon Rappoport. That's without an H. Jon. Coming up next, the one and only Ralph Ellis. We are about to rewrite history again on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. This is Fade to Black.
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Salt Lake City, Utah, Van Buren, Arkansas.
Hello, and you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Ray Hobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA Digital Broadcast Station.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
Yes. You want
We are of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
Ancient Life Oil. Life-changing. The real oil. CBD is truly ancient life oil from the source. This oil has no psychoactive effect and is also legal in all 50 states. When you're healthy, you're happy. The truth about this wonderful plant is that it wants to give back to mankind life, longevity, and happiness. Ancient Life Oil are golden grade, all organic, non-GMO, and infused with high-quality liquid coconut oil. It's simple. Just go to ancientlifeoil.com today. That's ancientlifeoil.com. The best, purest, organic, and non-GMO CBD in the world. Go back, Lee Tappy. The statements made regarding these products have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please consult your healthcare professional about potential interactions or other possible complications before using any product. What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring two Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The two full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129 and use the promo code JCRTWS and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go back, Lee Tappy.
This is Micah Hanks of the Grail Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. Truly bespoke radio for the masses. Very special Fader night tonight. I want to thank Jon Rappoport for coming in with his No More Fake Newsroom. But tonight we have Ralph Ellis back with us. And as all of you know, we did a series of shows last summer with Ralph that were total game changers. And nobody rewrites history like Ralph Ellis. He has been researching biblical and Egyptian history for more than 30 years. He's an independent from theological and educational establishments completely on his own. And that allows Ralph to tread where nobody else dares to go. And it is through this independence that Ralph has discovered so many new biblical and historical truths. His books include Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, Eden in Egypt, Adam and Eve were Pharaoh, Akhenaton, and Nefertiti, the King Jesus Trilogy, Cleopatra to Christ, Jesus, the great-grandson of Cleopatra, Thoth, the architect of the universe, and his latest work, the Grail Cypher, where Ralph explains that the Arthurian history is actually based upon gospel history. Stop me dead in my tracks. Ralph Ellis is the best. His website is edfu-books.com. The links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, live from Europe, from an undisclosed location, our good friend, Ralph Ellis. Ralph, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Jimmy. Yes, good to be with you again. Yeah, bright and early here. It's 3:30 in the morning, but it's still a nice morning.
Well, you've got that European coffee, so I know it's all good.
Yeah, not quite as strong as the American one, but it's waking me up very slowly.
What have you been up to, my friend? It's been too long since you've been on the show. If it was up to me, Ralph, and you and I talked about this, I would have you on every single week. I really would. What have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Oh, lots of things. I wrote a science paper on climatology.
That's right.
Because that's sort of something I do. So I wrote this science paper on the paleoclimatology, the ice ages. And that was an interesting project. That took me about 9 months to get that completed. And it was peer-reviewed and put out there as a proper science paper. Interesting project because, again, it went against the flow a little bit. It said that warming was caused by albedo, not by CO2. So that was an interesting little project.
How was it accepted? I don't expect it to be, accepted because you are going to do just that. You're going to do your thing because you are fully independent. But how was it accepted? Were there those out there that said, you know what, maybe we do need to take a look at this?
No, they simply refused to accept it.
Yeah.
So that is the problem with the consensus. So we produced a paper. I got a fellow scientist to make sure it was all done properly, and they just simply refused to accept it. So in the end, we had to go to Beijing University, and we got it published in Beijing. Very kindly, with the help of Beijing University, they paid for it, and they because they're quite expensive. If you write a paper and put it out on a scientific, not exactly a magazine, they're sort of online services.
Right.
They're hugely expensive. So anyway, they paid for it all, and we got it done that way. So yeah, it's a problem. It's the same problem that we face with the consensus in the biblical sense that I've been knocking my head against, and even the Arthurian one, of course. I had the same problem with the Arthurian book. My competitor, as it were, was it Guy Housel, I think, a professor of Arthurian legend, and he went to this trust fund, and he got a grant of £140,000. What's that? That's probably about $180,000 at present, or something like that.
Right.
To go and write a book about King Arthur. So I went to the same agency, and they said, "Go away."
The more that I move along through life, I study, I research, history just blows my mind. And every single day I discover more and more, Ralph, that we truly are taught nothing. It is all an untruth. Unless you saw it with your own eyes and it happened last week and you were a witness to it, that's one thing. But history itself, and the further that we go back, the less accurate we are, both with the calendar in a linear sense. It gets more and more fragmented. But there's only so many historians that were around back then. And so with them, how much can we depend on them? But all of Orthodox academia is written on that dogma. And it will never change, will it?
No, it won't. I've just had exactly the same problem with trying to update Wikipedia. And I was trying to put in a quote from Josephus, and it was thrown out of Wikipedia because they said, "We're not accepting Wikipedia." This was a quote about the Exodus. And he said, he said that Josephus Flavius is a primary historian of the Exodus. And I said, hold on a minute. He's not primary. He's 1,500 years displaced from the Exodus. He can't be primary.
Right.
So they said, okay, he's not trustworthy. We're not accepting him. And I said, well, hold on. The whole of Wikipedia, if you're talking about biblical history, is based upon Josephus.
100%. 100%.
100%. You can't throw Josephus out the window. And we're still fighting this. It's gone to arbitration now within Wikipedia because they keep deleting my updates. And what they won't allow, you see, Wikipedia is governed by a few gatekeepers. And if you've got a gatekeeper who happens to be religious and doesn't like what you're saying, and the particular gatekeeper I'm fighting here thinks he's the son of God, so, we're off to a bad start there, then they just keep deleting what you've written. And what I've written on the Exodus is that the Exodus was older than current history tends to say. Most people say it was the time of Ramesses II, 13th century BC. But if you read Josephus Flavius says the Exodus happened at the time of the Hyksos Exodus. He actually says that the Israelites were the Hyksos people, the Hyksos Egyptians of Egypt. Now that puts a totally different spin on not only the Exodus, because the Exodus must have happened in the 16th century BC, so about 300 years before people normally accept, but it also means that the Israelites were the Hyksos. And that's interesting because obviously, Josephus was the greatest Jewish historian there's ever been. He wrote the whole history of the Jews, and he's readily admitting that they were the Hyksos. So we now have a new source of information about the Israelites. You don't just have to depend on biblical history. You can actually go and look at real history, because we have the real history of the Hyksos. And the Hyksos, very much like the Israelites, they were Semitic people. They came down from sort of the northeast, from sort of Mesopotamia, and they took over Egypt, and they were in Egypt for about 300 years or so. And they were kicked out of Egypt on a huge, great exodus. And it just so happens that Exodus story is exactly the same as the biblical Exodus story. So we have a group of people who are called shepherds. They were known as the shepherd kings, just like the Israelites were also known as shepherds. They wore earrings. They had curly side locks of hair, just like the Jews do, of course. One of their pharaohs was called Jacob. Yep, there was a pharaoh called Jacob. And there was darkness and storms for 3 days, just like the plagues. And we have this from Egyptian history. It comes from a stele known as the Tempest Stele. And there was a war with the Egyptians, with the southern Egyptians, the upper Egyptians, with Ahmose I. And they were all kicked out of Egypt. And they started from Pi-Ramesses, that famous town in Egypt, and they went on a big exodus and ended up in Jerusalem. What? Sound familiar?
Yes,
yeah, of course.
It does. It does. And I have to say, what happened to Encyclopedia Britannica or any other reference material? Why is Wikipedia the end all now today of everything? How did we get here, Ralph? I mean, seriously.
Because it's easily accessible, I suppose. For a long time, Encyclopedia Britannica would not allow you onto their system. It just said, go and buy the encyclopedia. And people didn't. So they went to the free service, which was Wikipedia. But we have the same problem with Encyclopedia Britannica. They will not say that the Israelites are the Hyksos, even though it's blindingly obvious that that they were the Hyksos. And as I say, Josephus Flavius says that they were indeed the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. So the Israelite patriarchs, all of those patriarchs, were pharaohs of Egypt. So people like Abraham was Mamabra. The patriarch called Jacob, who is very famous, was Pharaoh Jacob. Pharaoh Jacobah, who was a Hyksos pharaoh. Now, all of that is so blindingly obvious, and yet no real reference book or encyclopedia will actually print that, because it's unacceptable, and so therefore they don't even look at it, and so you're not allowed to know about it. Wikipedia is refusing to tell people about it. They've just refused so far. Well, we're in arbitration now. But the funny thing was, while we were having this dispute, he said, right, you've got to have modern historians who have repeated this. You can't use Josephus. So I went hunting for modern historians that actually said this, repeated this. And I found two. They're not very well known, but I found two, and I put that into it and put that on Wikipedia. And they deleted it again. They said, oh, they're not good enough. We don't like the historians you found. But one of them was from 1840, so a 19th century historian. And I was reading through this, and I was suddenly finding that in the Victorian era, in fact, slightly before Victorian era, I suppose, some of this was acceptable. So they were more broad-minded within the Victorian era than we find within modern academia. So we had, he was quoting 2 or 3 different 19th century historians who were talking about the Israelites being the Hyksos. They didn't come to a full conclusion as to whether they were or not. They were trying to argue against it because they didn't like the idea of the Israelites being Egyptians. Nevertheless, they fully discussed this problem and wrote about it, which you won't find in the modern era. So I think, within history, we're regressing slightly. We're not as broad-minded as we were in the 19th century.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting about that. The 19th century, from 1800 to 1900, that entire period, they were rewriting history every single day. They finally figured out hieroglyphics. They were digging up Egypt, right, from the north to the south. Constantly making discoveries and papyri and just figuring things out, and they were just rewriting it every single day. They were okay. You're absolutely right. Open-minded. The door was stuck open. It was completely open. I totally agree with that. Well, also, I want to. This is a good opportunity for me to mention, and after the show, you can go and check this out, and I'll send you the links. We have a new project that we've started here. And it's called UniWiki, UniWiki.org. UniWiki. Yes. And so this is for us, our community, our researchers, and our community to contribute to all things that we are, that we speak about and talk about. And you are somebody that not only should participate, but it is an outlet for you. We launched it a couple of weeks ago. The engine is done. Software, it's done. So you should go check that out, and we'll start getting this published for you. So there you go. And I'm one of the moderators, so it's me you got to get the stuff by. But yeah, so go check it out, uniwiki.org. Now,
that sounds like a good idea. Yes.
Oh, it's a great idea. And wait till you see it. Just check it out. And it is very, 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 very cool. So with that, the Garden of Eden, everybody's been looking for it. And there's been a lot of pretty cool theories put out there about its location. In Kenya, all over, actually, Africa.
Yes.
And those were good theories, too, as well. I mean, you read it, and none of us really know because we weren't there. We've got to put the evidence together and try to figure this out. But the way that you, once again, man, Ralph, you just make me go, well, Ralph is right. So anyway, the Nile Valley... And we start to take a look at that. There's a reason why Egypt was what it was for so many thousands of years, because there was a Garden of Eden there. And so let's actually start there, and then we'll kind of work forward. Where do you think the Garden of Eden was, and why?
Yes, that was an interesting one, because this book actually came a bit later in my research, because a lot of the early research, as we were just talking about, had already placed biblical history back into Egypt, as we were just talking with the Israelites being the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. So I was already on to this theme of everything being Egyptian. But then I was sort of looking at Genesis, and it's so non-historical, it's so fanciful. You think, well, how can you ever prize any real information out of Genesis? It's just impossible. But I did notice that one of the first verses, if you go to Genesis 2:10, it says, a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted into 4 heads or branches. So a river goes through a garden and then divides into 4 branches. Well, sorry, but there's only one river in the whole of the world, really, pretty much, that does that, and that's the Nile. It runs through the garden oasis, the ribbon oasis of Egypt itself, and then it gets to Cairo and it divides into 4 branches, or it did divide into 4 branches. There's only 2 left now, but anyway, there used to be 4. It just had to be talking about Egypt again. And Josephus Flavius confirms this when he says that one of the rivers of Eden was the Nile. So we're talking about an Egyptian story here again, and we have this strange, what seems like a creation story. And it had a lot of synergy with some of the work I'd already been looking at. So the Garden of Eden looks like it was probably the Garden of Arten, because I'd already been researching the Garden of Arten before. And actually in Egyptian, if you look at the spelling in the hieroglyphs, it's probably the Garden of Eden. And what was the Garden of Eden? Well, that was the garden of the god Aten, or Eten, the god of Akhenaton. So we have a direct link here between Adam and Eve and Pharaoh Akhenaton and his queen Nefertiti.
Now, let me jump in here really quick, because when I look at the spelling, I mean, there's the obvious phonetic connection. If we go back to all of the ancient languages back then, phonetically, is that the connection? Because, over time, did Eden or Aten turn into Eden just because of the oral histories?
No, it was actually spelt like that. In my researches, I came across 2 ancient Egyptian texts that spelt the Aten with a D instead.
Oh,
so they
really?
called it Arden.
That's
so they
a
call it
whole
Arden. So, and those are our original Egyptian texts. Plus, of course, the god of the Israelites was called Arden. Exactly the same. So the God of the Israelites has many names. He was normally known as Yahweh or Elohim. And these are all solar aspects as well. We'll come to this when we maybe talk about Snow White or whatever. But Yahweh is the Egyptian Yah, which is the moon god. Elohim is the sun god. I'll have to work on that because that's a bit more complex. But anyway, one of the other names for the Israelite god was Arden. And the Arden has obviously come directly from Aten, or Arden, which was the god of Pharaoh Akhenaton. So we have a synergy here between the Israelite god, who was called Arden, and the Garden of Eden, which was called Eden. And of course, in the Egyptian spellings, I said they spell it with a reed glyph, which makes the god Aten becomes the god Eten. It's spelt more with an E than it is with an A. So we have pretty much exactly the same name, the Garden of Eden and the god of Eten. And so it just seemed like the Garden of Eden was, because all of these gods had gardens dedicated to themselves. If you look through Egypt, they loved their sacred gardens. In Babylon, they called them paradise. Paradise means a sacred garden. That's where we get the name from. So they all had sacred gardens dedicated to their god. And of course, in Amarna, they had a sacred garden that was dedicated to the god Aten. And so we had this connection with Akhenaton and Nefertiti. And if you look at the story of Genesis, of course, we have Akhenaton and Nefertiti always naked within their Garden of Aten. If you look at any of the iconography from that era, you will see that Akhenaton and Nefertiti were pretty much naked all the time. They were sort of like, 1960s hippies, sort of, in their wonderful garden. And that is the story of Genesis, isn't it? We have Adam and Eve who were naked within the Garden of Eden. And Akhenaton and Nefertiti were doing exactly the same. And this is where the Genesis story came from. What it turns out to be is it wasn't a foundation story, a Genesis story.
We'll be right back. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Ralph Ellis is here. This is Fade to Black. On the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet, we're writing history with Ralph Ellis. Once again, tonight, the Garden of Eden. We're going to get to King Solomon and connect the dots all the way to Snow White. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. We'll be right back.
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Salt Lake City, Utah, Van Buren, Arkansas.
And you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Ray Hobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA Digital Broadcast Station.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
Yes.
We're of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
Ancient Life Oil. Life-changing. The real oil. CBD is truly ancient life oil from the source. This oil has no psychoactive effect and is also legal in all 50 states. When you're healthy, you're happy. The truth about this wonderful plant is that it wants to give back to mankind life, longevity, and happiness. Ancient Life Oil are golden grade, all organic, non-GMO, and infused with high-quality liquid coconut oil. It's simple. Just go to ancientlifeoil.com today. That's ancientlifeoil.com. The best, purest, organic, and non-GMO CBD in the world. Go Beckley Tappy. The statements made regarding these products have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please consult your healthcare professional about potential interactions or other possible complications before using any product. What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring two Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The two full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129 and use the promo code JCRTWS and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go Beckley Tappy.
This is Micah Hanks of the Grailian Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Ralph Ellis. We were talking about the Nile. And my last question to you when everything started to go funky was your location for the Garden of Eden, and the Nile Valley where it dumps into the Mediterranean, because back then there were 4 branches off of the Nile, which was referenced historically. Today there's only 2, but back then there was 4. You started to talk about Akhenaton, Aten, Eden. And it makes a lot of sense. But what I wanted to, my next question to you at that point was, what about the timeline of things here? Because Akhenaton, and that we're talking about the 18th dynasty, 17th, 16th dynasty, and they all had gardens, yes, and I get that, and they all had their own temples, and I understand that too as well, and the gods had their own temples. But the Garden of Eden should have predated all of this before then. So what about that timeline?
Yeah, but only if it was actually a creation myth. You see, people have taken this as being a creation myth.
Right.
But they're wrong. What this was is a copy, a direct copy, I think, of Akhenaton's Hymn to the Aten. So Pharaoh Akhenaton made this glorious, great prayer to the Aten, which is known as the Hymn to the Aten. And if you pass Hymn to the Aten and break it down into its constituent parts, that is the story of Genesis. But what Akhenaton was talking about was not the creation of the universe or the world. He was talking about the creation of a new day. That's what the Hymn to the Aten was about. It was a celebration of the dawning of a new day. So it was a story of the sun coming up over the horizon and breaking the dark and giving light, and its warming rays warming the animals and the birds who spread their wings and come back to life, because it's the dawning of a new day. And it's quite obvious that someone at some point has taken this hymn and has thought to himself, that sort of looks like a creation myth. So we'll stick it at the beginning of this new book, which became called the Tanakh or the Torah, and it became their creation myth. But it wasn't. It was the Hymn to the Aten. And it's virtually identical all the way through if you look at it and break it down into its constituent parts. So that's where we get Genesis from. It was actually a story about Akhenaton and Nefertiti and their glorious palace down in Amarna, which is in Middle Egypt.
That's right.
Which had a garden of the Aten into it, the Garden of Eden. And they were the first man and woman, because that's what their official title was, just as the wife of the President of the United States is known as the First Lady. That doesn't mean that she's the first woman that's ever existed. It just means she's the First Lady.
Well, and they
society.
certainly created a new religion and tipped Egypt over, restarted things, and fired all of the priests, and moved forward through what was actually a very beautiful and artistic and creative period for Egypt. So if there was going to be a new creation myth started, it would make a lot of sense, at least to me.
Yes, of course. And they were naked within the Garden of Eden, because that's what the iconography of Egypt shows us. If you look at Nefertiti and Akhenaton, they were always portrayed as being naked within Amarna. And of course, that's where we get this idea of Adam and Eve being naked within the Garden of Eden, because it's part of the same story. But as you say, they started this new religion. They started monotheism. They were the first monotheists, the same as the Israelites were. And this was very unpopular at the time. And eventually they got thrown out of Amarna, just as Adam and Eve get thrown out of the Garden of Eden. They both had to go on an exodus. It is the same story. But it gives us another view of the Amarna era because, of course, we don't know what happened to Akhenaton and Nefertiti. And the inference from the biblical story, and this is the beauty of having these two stories about these same events, is it implies that they did not die in Amarna because there is no evidence that Nefertiti and Akhenaton died there. Everyone just assumes they did because they disappeared. But the story from Genesis seems to indicate that they actually were thrown out of Amarna, which is very, very likely, in fact. So their experiment failed, their new community failed. We know it ended very suddenly. There is no evidence of Akhenaton and Nefertiti actually dying in Amarna. So from Genesis, we can say that they were pushed out of there and they went on an exodus somewhere.
You know, this part of history, which is one of the most fascinating for me, we have gone back, Rita and I, and we do nothing but try to uncover more information here. The information simply goes away when it comes to these two. There are a lot of popular theories about what happened, but there isn't anything concrete. It's an amazing part of history. Until we barely knew what she looked like. We have one of the most beautiful sculptures in the world in all of history, which is her. It's in the British Museum now. I don't know if it's been returned to Cairo, but that's all we have. It's a very strange part of Egyptian history. Some say that she went to Turkey. Some say she went to Iraq. Some say she went out into the middle of the desert and with all of her possessions and just left. But we actually don't know. What do you think happened to Nefertiti?
Not sure what happened to her, because, as you say, she runs off the edge of history, and so we don't actually know what happened to Nefertiti and to Akhenaton. I get a suspicion that they may have gone to Greece, they may have gone to the Levant, I don't know, because the parallel story we get from this era is the story both from Geoffrey of Monmouth and from Scotti Chronicon in Scotland, which is the story of the British people and the story of the Scots. Now, that concentrates not on Akhenaton, but 2 pharaohs down. I say they are related, of course. That refers to Pharaoh I, who was the pharaoh who took over after Tutankhamun died.
Right.
And Scotti Chronicon, which is the Chronicle of the Scots, this goes back to the 14th century, and Geoffrey of Monmouth, which goes back to the 12th century, are both saying that Pharaoh I was pushed out of Egypt. This would have been circa 1300 BC, and went into exile, exactly the same as Akhenaton and Nefertiti did.
That's right.
Because they were unpopular for the very same reason, because they were Artanists, they were monotheists. They were trying to re-establish monotheism within Egypt, and they were as unpopular as Akhenaton, and they got pushed out of Egypt.
You should see Twitter right now, Ralph. I have all of these different theories about why they were pushed out, right? And each one of them is different, and yours is going to be different. This is mine. This is how my mind works. You're going to laugh. But you know what? You may agree with me. I think it was money. I think the priests at each one of those sites, at each one of those temples, who were all powerful before Akhenaton, they ran the communities. They also had a money system. So everything was donated, the food, the thing, life. They were rich. And Akhenaton and Nefertiti come along, and those guys are out of a gig. They're out of a gig.
Yes.
So, and they wanted that back. They had the easy life, and this was up and down the Nile. This just wasn't at Amana or one single. It was at all of the temples in Egypt, and they wanted their lifestyle back. And I really think that they convinced the community that they needed to go back to the old system of the gods for whatever reason. For them, it was money. They would convince the communities and the cities around those temples, it was the gods, and they wanted the old system back. But they did it because of money. That's my take. I think it was an overthrow. It was a revolt.
It's the same throughout history. It was money and it was power. It was both together.
Yep.
It was Akhenaton. Some people say that he was a bit of a hippie and not very powerful. However, he must have been very, very powerful, because what he was doing was the same as now going to Rome and closing down the Catholic Church and turning the Vatican into a hostel or something. I don't know. That's what he was doing. He was closing down the Catholic Church. And of course, there would be any number of priests and powerful people who were against this, because it was not only taking their money away, it was taking their power away. So, these institutions are self-perpetuating always, because the people who come up through the system, they grow up through that system. They not only believe it, but they depend on it, because that is their power base, that is their livelihood, that is everything. This is why we have, even in a more petty sort of world, why I have problems with my King Arthur story, because we have another institution in the modern world called academia, and they depend for their lifestyle in exactly the same way as the Catholic Church depends for their lifestyle on the institution that surrounds them. And if you try and undermine that institution that they are a part of and gives them a livelihood, they are against it. And that's exactly what Akhenaton had. He had that problem. He was trying to change the religion, I think, because of the previous Exodus. Because remember the Exodus we were talking about, the Hyksos Exodus, because he was a Hyksos sympathizer. He was of the same sort of bent as they were. They had this huge, great civil war and the exodus of the Hyksos people because of a disagreement about the constellations in the heavens above. So we had the Upper Egyptians still believing in the Apis bull, which was Taurus, and the Hyksos were the shepherd kings, and they were believing in Aries, because the sheep, because Taurus had turned into Aries in the processional zodiac in about 1750 BC. And the Upper Egyptians got left behind. They were still worshipping Taurus, but the Hyksos shepherd kings had moved on forward because they saw that the constellations had changed and Aries was now in the ascendants, and they had turned into worshipping sheep. And that's where this bitter dispute came from. And Akhenaton was trying to stop that happening again by getting rid of all of this iconography that caused the problem in the first place. And there is, again, coming back to the biblical links here, we have this beautiful story within the book of Genesis. Yeah, it must be Genesis, where Joseph, him of the coat of the many colors, who becomes the prime minister of Egypt, which tells you how powerful the Israelites were in Egypt. He became the prime minister, second only to Pharaoh. And he wants his brothers to come down into Egypt. And he has a word with them beforehand, and he says, look, you're going to speak to Pharaoh. When you speak to Pharaoh, don't say that you are shepherds. Say that you are cattle breeders, because only then will you be accepted within Egypt. Now, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever in terms of agriculture, because there was nothing against eating sheep within Egypt. What they were talking about was religion. they were talking about the Apis bull and the Hyksos shepherds. So what Joseph was saying to his brothers is, when you see Pharaoh, don't say that you are shepherds. Don't say you are Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt, or had been Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. Say that you are bull worshippers, that you are followers of Taurus. That way you will be accepted in Egypt. Because remember, Joseph was after the Exodus. In historical terms, this is them coming back down into Egypt. This is the story of them coming back into Egypt. And of course, the Upper Egyptians wouldn't like the shepherd kings coming back into Egypt, because they just had this enormous great civil war and exodus, which was, I don't know, maybe a couple of 100 years before. Of course, they wouldn't be accepted. So they were trying to pretend that they were worshippers of Taurus, of the Apis bull. So that entire story within the book of Genesis makes absolutely no sense whatsoever in the way it has been presented to us.
Unless you make those connections back to Egypt.
Absolutely.
Wow,
and that's what they will not do.
Right.
They just will not do it.
Well, every time you're on the show, I imagine you moving your chair around in your house to avoid the lightning strikes that are, that are going to come through the roof at any moment. And here, if we are going to go back to the creation legend and myth with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and get its, I guess, the progenitor to this being Akhenaton and Nefertiti and Egypt and Egyptian on the Nile in Amana, of all things. You are asking for a lightning strike right now, Ralph. And there are Christians out there and Catholics that are going to listen to this and go, wait a minute here. We got to pump the brakes on this truck. This is pushing things a bit too far. But is there other creation myths similar to Adam and Eve out there that could have the same source going back to Akhenaton and Nefertiti?
Yeah, probably. I'm not quite sure what you're alluding to there. I've sort of moved around that story, and it all sort of fits into the Egyptian story very well. So the whole of Genesis.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying is, let me see if I can clean that up. If you go around the world to many different cultures and civilizations and look at the different religions around the world, you are going to have somebody that was resurrected, somebody that was dead for 3 days, somebody that had 12 disciples, somebody that was born of a virgin mother, right? I mean, the stories spread around the world. It's not just Jesus and the Bible, right? It's all around the world. And if we go back with that same creation myth, could all of those origins of the creation myth focus right back to Akhenaton and Nefertiti?
Yeah, certainly they were very, very influential because of the exodus they had. So we have 2-3 recognized exoduses that have come out of here. We had the exodus of Akhenaton. We had the exodus of the Hyksos people. That's way back in 1570 odd BC. We had the exodus of Akhenaton, 1320 BC. We had the exodus of Pharaoh I that we were just talking about, which was about 1300 BC, who went around to Spain and then to Ireland and then to Scotland. So all of these exoduses, and they went to Greece as well. They took over Greece. That was part of the Spartan story.
That's right.
All of those exoduses was spreading this information around the whole of Europe. And of course, they were well connected with Mesopotamia as well. So those stories would have gone into Mesopotamia. So although they were tragedies, these exoduses, they actually spread these beliefs far and wide, much further than the Upper Egyptians sitting in Upper Egypt who just remained where they were. And so these stories were spread all over what was effectively then at that time the known world. And that's why I think they became quite so global.
The when we deal with Adam and Eve being and again, I'm going to have to move my chair around. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. It's hot in here. If we start to do this where the puzzle pieces fit together and it makes sense, right? It's clear as day that this is where the story came from and the Bible was written off of this. It's okay, right? I feel that it's okay, even though it's hot in here right now. Why do we have those closed minds out there? You know, it's not wrong. It's not like the earth is going to split in two because of this. If that is just the case, why not just rewrite history and let's be okay with it? Why the closed minds?
Yeah, I don't get it because I don't have that sort of closed mind, as you know. I mean, I can't write all of these books and have a closed mind. But you come across this time and time again. Half of it is due to people being brought up with one particular belief type system, and they don't want. It's very distressing to have that changed and someone come along and say, you know, everything you understand is actually wrong. And then you have people within academia and the church who both have the same problem, even though they don't recognize themselves as being similar. But they both have the same problem, that they have been brought up within these paradigms, that this is their belief system, and they've been teaching it for the last 30 years, maybe more, within their institution. And now someone comes along and says, aha, everything you've taught over the last 30 years, in fact, your whole life, has been a complete waste of time.
Right.
Because you've been teaching absolute nonsense for the last 30 years. And of course, they're not going to want to recognize that whatsoever. And so they do whatever they can, not only to preserve their institution they're working for, whether it's academia or whether it's the Catholic Church. They're not only trying to preserve that institution, but they're trying to preserve their own integrity, because that's what they've taught people for the last. They can't admit that they've been wrong for 30 years and been teaching a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
And so they protect themselves.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated with that. And today, because of you and the internet and the ability for shows like this and to get communication out there to the masses like we do now, isolation and communities was key to religion. You didn't want the secret out, right? You wanted to control the community and do your thing, or the city or the state, but you didn't want the information leaked. Now, around the world, everybody's starting to figure out, hey, wait a minute. Every savior in every religion was born on December 25th? Wait a minute here. What's going on? Right? And they're starting, now they can sit back, and they don't want, they could control the narrative before. They can't do that now. And with you speaking like this, it's okay. It's going to, I'll use the word, it's going to piss some people off. But we have to go back and actually be sensible about things, because everything has an origin. It's like the game telephone, right? When that you played when you were a kid, and the more that you tell the story over years and centuries and millennia, it can get twisted around a little bit, but after a while it becomes truth. It gets written down, and you have the Bible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And people don't want to move away from that. There is still an undercurrent of people who do want to put out the truth, but it's been very difficult. The internet is helping, of course, because it's putting this information out into the general masses, which has been, it's been covered by secret societies for a long time. So the information was there, and we sort of have this from some of our fairy stories. Have we been through Snow White and things like that?
No, we're going to do that when we come back, and also King Solomon as well. Let's take a break right here. And I haven't told you my fairy story, what happened to me last month. A real fairy story. Maybe I'll tell Ralph that with everybody when we come back. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Ralph Ellis, rewriting history again. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. KGRARadio.com.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Hello, Fadernauts. This is Jimmy Church, and I'm introducing New Pharma, a company whose products are based on science. Human function based on the endocannabinoid system, or ECS. New Pharma firmly believes in this science, and their research indicates that support of the ECS provides the beneficial effects for a healthy lifestyle. New Pharma's science includes relief capsules for pain relief, sleep capsules, which are natural support for occasional sleeplessness. Foundation is support for your ECS, and Fit capsules support your active lifestyle. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2B for a 33% discount on all of their products. Or visit newpharma.com for all of the knowledge on the science. That's GNUpharma.com. Go Beckley Tappy.
Hi, I'm Matt Ray for U.S. Gold Bureau. I cover the market daily. No matter how strong it gets or what long-term predictions say, you can count on one thing as certain. There will be another crash. It will affect your assets. And when it happens, wouldn't you rather be 2 weeks or even 2 months ahead of the curve? Well, Wall Street insiders have been quietly converting their assets into gold for the last few years. Now it's your turn. Buying gold and silver is easier than buying stocks. With the U.S. Gold Bureau's Investor Guide, it's free, and you learn how to buy precious metals in or out of an IRA or 401k retirement plan. Your investment's shipped directly to your home and is 100% insured and guaranteed. You control your investments and shelter them against the stock market, politics, and unknown threats. Act while your dollar is still worth something. Call U.S. Gold Bureau, 800-885-GOLD. U.S. Gold Bureau, 800-885-GOLD, 800-885-GOLD. Call today.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRARadio.com.
Hi, folks. CBD is the home run hitter for health right now. Why, you ask? Because of what it does for the body. Unfortunately, I can't tell you all about the benefit. You know, there's reasons. Do your due diligence and log on to ancientlifeoil.com. That's ancientlifeoil.com. Ancient Life Oil uses organic ingredients and is blended in coconut oil for some of the best benefits. Legal in 50 states and non-psychoactive. Log on to ancientlifeoil.com. That's ancientlifeoil.com.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Welcome back, Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Ralph Ellis, rewriting history. Taking a few bodies along with us at the same time. Ralph Ellis is the best. Now, Ralph, right before the break, we brought up fairies, and I mentioned my fairy story. So I'm going to give you the short, abridged version of this. I like jewelry, right? So I wear a lot of jewelry. And I got a couple of rings that I wear. And one of them on my right hand, I cannot remove. Okay, are you back with us, Ralph?
Yes, I'm
okay.
here.
I'm telling you the fairy story. So anyway, I have a ring on my right hand that I have jewelry on. we're up at a ranch last month, and at this ranch up in Washington, we get this warning that they have fairies there. And if fairies show up, you're going to lose something. You're going to lose your keys. You're going to lose something. Just ask the fairies nicely to return them, and you will. And I'm just laughing. I'm rolling my eyes, right? Okay, so the next day, I get back to our hotel room. I'm taking off my jewelry, getting ready for bed, necklaces and things. And I go, and my ring is missing on my right hand, right? And I'm like, what? I can't take this ring off, and it's now gone. And I look in the car. I'm let's go to bed. I'll find it in the morning. I took it off somewhere and set it down. I wake up in the morning, look for it, can't find it. And I'm like, I got to ask the fairies, to return this ring. And Rita's like, you're not. I said, I am. Fairies, I want my ring back, please, And we go back to the ranch. And I walk in, and I go up to the manager of the ranch and a couple of other employees there. And I say, look, my ring is missing. And I asked the fairies this morning to return it. And she goes, when? I said, about a half hour ago. And Lori turns to me and she goes, what kind of ring was it? She goes, was it a spinner silver? I go, yes. She goes, somebody returned it to me 15 minutes ago and handed it to me. Now, all I got to say is this. Fairies are real. I don't care what anybody said. I'm picturing, now I found out where the ring was found. This is a 78-acre ranch. The ring was found under a chair that I was sitting in 24 hours before and fell on the floor. There's no way it fell off my hand. I'm picturing little fairies, don't wake them up. Right, pulling on, but they got the ring off, and it really, really happened, Ralph. Fairies are real. It's a real thing. We had another fairy experience this past weekend. So now we were going to morph this into and connect the dots into Snow White and also King Solomon, him being a pharaoh, which again is going to cause a few lightning strikes on both sides of the Atlantic tonight. But so let's talk a little Snow White here. Or should we do King Solomon first? In connecting these dots.
Let's drop into Snow White because it's an interesting little story, because we were talking about, these traditions going underground. And this is one of the areas where these traditions went underground, because you weren't really allowed to talk about this, especially going back, 18th century, even 19th century. You're talking about lightning strikes. Yeah, they were real, some of these lightning strikes. You had to be careful what you said before the 20th century came along. We're very we're very we live in a very easy environment here where we can actually talk about these things fairly easily without persecution. But of course, back then you couldn't. And so a lot of these traditions went underground, and some of the places it went to, it went within Masonry and various other secret societies. But one of the places it went to was fairy stories, because of all the things you could write, you were not going to be persecuted for writing a fairy story, because you could always say it's just made up. And it just struck me that some of these fairy stories that have come out of a relatively ancient past were alluding to the same things that I was researching. One of them was Little Mermaid, who is the ginger-haired girl, of course, and she's a mermaid. And remember that all of these characters from the past were ginger-haired. So Jesus was probably ginger-haired. That's why modern Muslims tend to wear ginger hair, because they were following the previous prophet. And the Dead Sea Scrolls says that the new Messiah was going to be ginger-haired with freckles. And even back into Egyptian history, if you're talking about Ramesses II, again, this is not widely talked about. People don't like talking about it, but the mummy of Ramesses II was taken over to France. This is back in the 1990s. And it was taken to the forensic laboratory in Paris, and they did an investigation. They were trying to stabilize his mummy because it was beginning to deteriorate. They found some bugs on it. So they did a forensic analysis of his body, and it turns out that Ramesses II was a pale-skinned, ginger-haired guy. And so we have this tradition of ginger going all the way back through the biblical story, the Hyksos story. And you've got this little mermaid character who's another of these sort of redheads. And
wasn't Jesus a ginger too?
Yeah, he was ginger. Yeah, he definitely was ginger. Because we have this, as I say, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which say that the new Messiah will have freckles and ginger haired. So we're fairly confident that Jesus was probably ginger haired, and that's why all of the Renaissance paintings you see of Mary Magdalene are always with her with golden hair. So that was the sort of phenotype we're looking for, and we have this little mermaid character who's in the sea, and of course Mary Magdalene was known as the Stella Maris. This could have been Mary the Virgin, of course. They both had the same titles. She was known as the Stella Maris, which means the sea star. She was a mermaid as well, and within the Little Mermaid story, of course, one of the things that Ariel rescues is a picture of Mary Magdalene. It's a very famous picture, is Mary Magdalene and the Smoking Flame by Gregory Latour. And this is made into a part of the Disney film.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah, so it's a direct reference back to Mary Magdalene, because she was Little Mermaid was Mary Magdalene.
Man, you're messing with my head now. Yeah, that's right. Watch that.
And then we go on to Rapunzel, of course, and we've got Rapunzel is this princess in a tower with long golden hair again. They always have golden hair. And she puts down her golden hair for her lost prince. This is the lost prince story again. And of course, the lost prince is Jesus himself. And of course, Rapunzel in the tower. What is a tower? If we go back into Egyptian language or into Aramaic, a tower is a Magdal. And so Rapunzel is the Magdalene because she's in the tower.
Oh. Now, this is what comes to mind really quick before we move on. The Brothers Grimm, who wrote the scariest stuff ever known to man.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely frightening stuff. Make no mistake about it. The best. But it caused a lot of us children nightmares. Are you suggesting that these guys were really read religious scholars and studied the ancient myths and were able to pull these stories out? I thought they were originals, right? The Grimm.
Yeah. But the Brothers Grimm were exactly that. They were scholars. They were linguists. This was their daily work. This is what they did. They weren't just making fairy stories. These were very celebrated linguists from Germany. So this was part and parcel of what they were doing, and they were encoding, as far as I can see, some of these ancient stories, because they went around following all of these ancient stories that they could follow and research and put them into the fairy stories they were making. And one of the ones they made was Snow White.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get the Snow White story initially because she has black hair. She's not the Magdalene figure.
Right.
But then it turned out that she was Lilith. She was the moon. So Snow White is the Snow White moon. And when she walks around with the 7 dwarfs walking behind her in a long line, she is the moon followed by the 7 planets. And they all walk in a long line together along the ecliptic in the sky above, exactly as they do within Snow White. And then she has this, this evil witch that tries to kill her, and the evil witch turns out to be the Milky Way, but that's beside the point here. So the evil witch comes along and gives Snow White a corset. which she tightens and tightens and tightens to make Snow White go slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. And that's the moon waning as the moon goes into a crescent moon, getting thinner every day until she dies. She becomes the new moon. She goes black. She's dead. But how do you revive the dead moon, the dead Snow White? Well, you get the prince that comes along, and the prince is obviously the solar deity. He is Helios, Aten, he is the sun. And he comes along and kisses the moon. Now, there is only one time, you've just had it in America actually, there is only one time that the sun can kiss the moon, and that's during an eclipse, where the moon passes in front of the sun.
Right.
So the dead sun, and the moon has to be dead during an eclipse because it has to be a new moon. So the dead moon comes up to the sun, kisses the moon, and she comes back to life. And you have a syzygy, they call it. You have an eclipse. And you have the marriage ring. You remember they talking about the diamond ring of the eclipse?
That's right.
That is the marriage ring between, it's a marriage between the moon and the sun, which happened to be exactly the same diameter in the night sky. So it's a cosmic marriage. This is the sun and the moon in flagranti delicto in the heavens above. And then, of course, after the eclipse, the moon comes back to life again, and she gets fatter and fatter and fatter. She's now pregnant with the new cosmic gods in the heavens above. That is the story of Snow White, and that again has been worked its way into our consciousness via a fairy story. You couldn't maybe tell that story as a story of the cosmos because it's really a story about Mary the Virgin. But you can tell it as a fairy story, and everybody knows it. But only a few know what it means.
Do you
and that's
think
what
that
these stories do?
What about that message? Because of the ages of, most that are opened up to the story first were 5, 6, 7 years old, right? And you're watching the cartoon or you're reading the book, and you're looking at the illustrations and the Brothers Grimm version of it. Does it subliminally get through?
Yeah, I think it does, because it's a part and parcel of the Western world. If you were brought up in India, you wouldn't have these stories. You would have some other foundation to your belief system. But this sort of lost prince story becomes a central element of a lot of people's lives, especially, dare I say, ladies who like this idea of the lost prince. So, she's the princess looking for the lost prince, the Cinderella story.
Right.
And even the Cinderella story is very much the same. She loses her slipper, exactly the same as Jason from Jason and the Argonauts.
Right.
He is only recognized as a prince because he loses a slipper.
Right.
These are old memes coming back from bygone ages. And it becomes a part and parcel of our culture. And it's very specific because it's part of this lost prince story. And the lost prince is Mary Magdalene looking for her Jesus, who she lost after the Jewish revolt. This is the story of Mary going into France, into Provence, and being separated from Jesus, who was imprisoned elsewhere, which I write about in my Mary Magdalene book, where, what's that one called? That's Mary Magdalene, Princess of Orange, where she is separated from Jesus, and she is now the lost princess down in France. So we all know this story through all of these fairy stories. And it doesn't take much of a jog to put you on the right road. It's actually quite a good way of doing it, because you're brought up on these stories. You know these stories, and you don't hear much more about it until maybe you go to lodge, if you become a Mason. And then someone, when you're much older, you're in your 30s, your 40s, and say, do you realize what that meant? And then you'll go, yeah, of course. I've known about that for 40 years, didn't realize what it was talking about.
I do the same thing, now, whenever, especially since you were on, whenever I'm watching a King Arthur movie or some Jesus historical religious narrative, or it doesn't really matter now, and going through to The Lion King or any of this modern, it's twisted up to me. You have managed to single-handedly, and I'm not joking about this now. I was just, over the last 6 months, I've probably seen 3 or 4 different King Arthur movies and read some stuff. And I just see the entire disciples and Jesus story played out in the King Arthur mythos. It's yes. Really funny. It's the only way to look at it now. I don't know why.
Yes, you can't see it any other way now. It's impossible, isn't it?
Well,
yeah, that's funny, and that's exactly what they were doing. They were doing exactly the same as the fairy story idea, that you could not tell this story openly, but you could make it into a mythology. You could talk about King Arthur and make up stories about King Arthur. And then again, no one would know what it's talking about until you go somewhere where someone says, did you know King Arthur is actually a story about Jesus? And then you go, oh, gosh, yeah, now it all makes sense. I didn't know what this story meant before, but now it all makes sense. Then they were doing exactly the same thing. They were hiding these stories in acceptable fashions through mythology.
Yeah, and Joseph Campbell, with the hero's journey, right? And when you start to study all of this, and you go back and you look at all the great writers, and you look at all of the great stories, and like you just said, the Argonauts, right? If you go back and you look at Odysseus, if you go back and look at everything, they all fit the same narrative. They all repeat themselves because the story has been so fine-tuned, right, over time. You just rewrite that story, like Snow White. Well, you know what? The Brothers Grimm, they had the history to write upon, turn it into something modern, make it a fairy, and run with it because the story itself is perfect by this point.
Yeah, and and it's interesting how that story can be embedded and hidden so that only less than 1% of the population can actually read it and know what it talks about. It's very effective, and it's kept these traditions alive, when they would have died otherwise. So, yeah, it does appear that there are 1 or 2 people behind the scenes that know about this, but it's not been put out into the public arena very much. And that's what this series of books are doing. All of my books are bringing this knowledge out and re-putting it back into the public arena. And some of it is so old, it's been lost. I really do think that the Arthurian story was lost, because although it was there, it was written into mythology, so it would be preserved. I've not seen any indication that anyone knew what it was until I brought it out. So it's there, waiting for someone to bring it out. And there are probably other stories out there waiting for someone to bring them out, because it's been forgotten about. No one's talked about the King Arthur story being a new gospel, basically, the Jesus story.
Right.
No one's talked about that for maybe, I don't know, maybe 500 years.
I was going to say forever. Yeah, 500.
Yeah, well, certainly, it was written about up to the 13th century. People were avidly writing about it. And then you come on to some of the later Arthurian histories and coming up into the more sort of Victorian era, and they're writing about it, and you think, hey, these guys don't understand the story. They know the history, but they don't understand the story. You get people like William Nietzsche, I think it was the great Arthurian historian. I think he was German. And like we were talking about academia before, some of these 20th century academics were absolutely superb. If you want to see a good analysis of Arthurian history, go back to Nietzsche and some of the other Victorians. They really knew their stuff. But you're reading through this and thinking, they didn't understand the underlying story. They didn't understand that this story came out of
Jerusalem,
out of out of Jerusalem.
But how could they?
It says, William Neitz, because it talks about, just very briefly here, it talks about the author of Arthurian history being Josephus Flavius. And of course, Neitz and some of the other historians are saying, well, obviously this is a total mistake. They've got themselves confused here, because you can't have a first century historian writing about 6th century events. So there is a bit of a confusion within the text here. And you're thinking, well, yeah, you know a lot of stuff, but you haven't grasped the story, that this is actually about, the gospel story. And that is why Josephus Flavius is able to write about it. Because it was a first century story.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, Ralph. When you see these British researchers going all over the UK, and this has gone on for decades now, looking for the burial site of King Arthur, or they found it, right? They found the gravestone. Yes. It's over. What's your reaction to that? Do you just completely roll your eyes?
Yeah, I do a little bit, because you see them actually saying this based on a similar name. Well, there are so many towns and cities in Britain. You could find any name you wanted. And they say, oh, we found a name that's similar to Camelot. Yeah, oh, brilliant. If you're going to look into an ancient mythology and actually find it within history, you have to have multiple points of contact, not a single similarity. So when looking at the Genesis story, there were multiple points of evidence which pointed towards the Genesis story being the hymn to the Arton. It wasn't just a similarity of one name or one person or something. I forget how many points of similarity I found, but it was something like 20 or so different points which all alluded to this story being the hymn to the Arton. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to do the research properly. You can't just say, oh, look, I found a similar town that sounds like Avalon or something. It's got to go much deeper than that. So yeah, I do roll my eyes a little bit, but I roll my eyes at academia as well, because they miss the whole story as well. You have this story. I think one of the guys was Guy Halsall, who wrote a story about he's the professor who got £140,000 to go and write a story about King Arthur. And he wrote a history of King Arthur without ever reading the Vulgate cycle. Now, that is rather like writing a history of Jesus without reading the Gospels.
Right. Any of them.
Think,
right.
This guy was actually paid to write this little booklet that he wrote. And you think, hold on a minute, is this scholarship? This is why I despair sometimes with modern academia. You wouldn't get the old Victorian historians doing that. They would spend years looking into this subject and write a vast tome of 800 pages on the history of Arthur. But you don't get that in modern academia. I think his book was like 180 pages, and it never ever touched on the Vulgate cycle, which is ridiculous.
You have the whole of the United Kingdom that, and without exaggerating here, that truly believe that King Arthur was real. And you are doing what you're doing. Can you safely walk down the streets? I mean, that's
yes,
Ralph
I get
Ellis.
it from both sides. It's unfortunate that I
can't
get it from
imagine.
academia, because they don't like me linking Arthur back to the gospel stories.
No.
And I don't like it from Arthurian purists, because they don't like me linking, destroying their Arthur, really, because they have this wonderful hero, British hero, and suddenly he's not a British hero at all. He's actually a Judean hero back in the 1st century.
That's Ralph guy that says King Arthur wasn't real. What? Him?
Yeah.
Get a rope. Our guest tonight, Ralph Ellis. So let's take a break right here. When we come back, we're going to do some King Solomon. That's right. He was a pharaoh. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Ralph after this short break. Stay with us.
Hi, everybody. This is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station. Salt Lake City, Utah. Van Buren, Arkansas.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on the smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Your contact for current news and trending topics. KGRARadio.com.
Do you worry a lot? If you're forgetful, nervous, moody, or overwhelmed, chances are you're not protecting yourself from the ravaging effects of stress and anxiety. No matter the cause, ongoing stress and elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol can rob your memory, your health, your quality of life, and your future. Now you can combat the effects of stress and anxiety while improving your memory and recall at the same time with the dietary supplement Calm and Clever. Studies show that the ingredients in Calm and Clever reduce cortisol by as much as 30% in as little as 1 to 2 weeks and increase your ability to recall facts, names, and numbers in 4 to 12 weeks. Calm and Clever was created by scientist Kurt Hendricks, a principal investigator in 2 NIH-funded studies on Alzheimer's disease. Try Calm and Clever for 2 months. You'll feel the difference. Call 1-800-758-8746 or go to calmandclever.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of Fade to Black by just calling 605-562-4482. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Just call 605-562-4482. You can listen to me, Jimmy Church, on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Go Beckley Tappy.
You want to know a secret? I love ponies. I really love ponies. I'm serious. I couldn't stay sane without ponies to brush.
Why Fade to Black? Because you never got that pony, damn
it. This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Ralph Ellis. Nothing like bringing the knowledge. That's what this show is about. Tipping the boat over. And Ralph, nobody does it better than you, my friend. Well, let's just go there. Let's do King Solomon. If we're just going to take everything and throw it out the window, King Solomon was a pharaoh. I'm going to hand that off to you.
Yeah, so we're going back into Egypt again, like all of these stories, and I was looking for Solomon because we always have these missing people, all of these famous characters from the Tanakh, from the Bible. They're all missing from the historical record. And you've got to think, hold on a minute, either this book is complete mythology or we're looking in the wrong place or maybe the wrong era for these people. And so I sort of went looking for Solomon. And I didn't find him initially. I found King David instead.
Right. Well,
because
let me jump in. King Solomon, for as great and as written about as he is in the Bible, there isn't anything out there. If you're going to go search for King Solomon, you're going to find nothing but dead ends. Right? There's
absolutely
no sculpture, nothing written. King Solomon's everything that is there. Could it all be myth?
Well, according to what they call the minimalists within the historical fraternity, yes, he didn't exist. If you read Silberman and Filkenstein, who are some of the two great archaeologists from Israel, and they will say that it's complete mythology because they cannot find anything to do with the united monarchy. In fact, they say that at the time that we're talking here, the 10th century BC, Jerusalem was no more than a village. So there was no monarchy, there was no great empire, there was no wealth, there was no Solomon, there was no King David, because he's just not there in the historical record. So if you're going to if you have an inkling that the biblical story is correct. And I have this inkling now because I've found so many of these people already in the historical record. The Israelites became the Hyksos and so on. If we're going to find the united monarchy, we're going to have to look somewhere else for them. And the first indication that this was an Egyptian story is King David, who was known for his star and his city. The Star of David, the City of David. And there was a Pharaoh at exactly the same time as David in the historical record who was known for his star and his city. And that is Paseba-Kahayanet, who is known in the Greek record, which is what we have today. He is known as Susens. And he was known for exactly the same symbolism as King David was. So I thought, well, this is interesting. We'll run with this and see what happens. And as I was saying before, if you're looking into mythology, you can't just find one similarity and say, look, I found this guy. You've got to find multiple similarities. And even better, and what has actually happened in this case, is once you've made the identification, it's got to explain things that were previously inexplicable. Then you're on the right road. And this did that as well, because what it did is it explained exactly who the Queen of Sheba was. Who is this nebulous figure that nobody knows who on earth she was, and yet this new identification showed who the Queen of Sheba was. So we had this link back to Paseba-Kahayanet, who was a 21st dynasty pharaoh of Egypt, who lived at the same time as David. And his name was either Duat or Sheba. So you have these big long names for the Egyptian pharaohs, but you can choose a portion of his name. And this guy was known either as Duat or Sheba. So the Duat is where we get David from, because if you look in the Bible, the name for King David was King Duat. So that was his name. So we're on the right road here. But he was also known in the Egyptian record as King Sheba. And this is where we get the Queen of Sheba from. So it turns out, if you look very closely at the biblical record, King David married Bathsheba. That was his last wife. Yeah, that was his last wife, his favorite wife, who was much, much younger than he was. And she was called Bathsheba, which means the daughter of Sheba. But now in the historical record, in the Egyptian record, this same guy King David was called King Sheba. So now we have King Sheba and Bathsheba, the daughter of Sheba. So Bathsheba, who became the wife of King David, was actually his daughter. So he married his daughter. And this is quite often, we have this in the New Testament as well, but always back through through the Old Testament. We have these big cover-ups in the story because later theologians, Jewish rabbis, didn't want you to know that all of these people were marrying their sisters and daughters. It was not acceptable in later eras, and so they covered it up. This is why, I mean, even in the first century, you know, have people like King Agrippa married his sister, and Simon Magus married his sister, and Jesus married his sister, who was Mary Magdalene. All of these people were marrying within the family. Queen Theomusa Urania married her brother. Queen Cleopatra married both of her brothers. This was just normal Egyptian practice. But what they've tried to do is cover it up. And so they covered up the fact that Bathsheba, the daughter of Sheba, was actually King David's daughter. So he married his daughter.
Now, I wanted to ask you,
quickly, before you jump in there, Jimmy, what happened is she was Bathsheba. When she married the king, she became the queen of Sheba. The Bathsheba became the Malka Sheba, the queen of Sheba. And this is where we get the queen of Sheba from. So now we know who she was. She was Bathsheba, and she was the daughter of King David.
Now, with the myth, because you're right about that, the archaeological record is having a hard time getting anything solid on King Solomon, or his mines, or his gold, or the treasures, or the tunnels, or anything at all. How did that move from Egypt? Geographically, they're very close, but the Temple Mount and everything that was supposed to have been there originally for King Solomon, how did that move from Egypt to Israel?
Yeah, interesting. Good question, because part of the mix-up is because the two major cities had the same name. So the capital city of this particular pharaoh, Pasibeka-Hainet, was Zoan. And Jerusalem is called Zion. It has the same name within Aramaic. And so there's an easy confusion to make between the two. Now, this particular pharaoh, this dynasty, was originally just a dynasty of Lower Egypt in the Nile Delta. But they started a big expansion. They became the big global monarchy that the Bible describes. So they took over most of Upper Egypt, and then they took over all of the Levant, all of Judea and Israel and southern Syria. They took over all of those regions. So you can say that this particular pharaoh was indeed the king of what became Judea, because they took it over. They were the king of Judea, but their capital city was not at Zion, it was at Zoan. So they actually became the kings of Judea in later eras during the divided monarchy. So the monarchy divided after the united monarchy, after Solomon. The monarchy divided and was separated. And this is when we start to get some of these people living in and ruling in Judea and Israel. But the main time we get them actually living in the Levant instead of Egypt is after the Babylonian exile. Because in the 7th century, the Persians came down and took over all of the Levant, all of Judea, and they took over most of Lower Egypt as well. And they shipped off all of the Israelites to Mesopotamia and held them in the Babylonian exile. And they were there for about 40 years. They were released from imprisonment by Darius, I think it was, Darius II. And they were then allowed to move back to the Near East. But they weren't allowed to go back to Egypt at that point. They were only allowed to go back to Judea and Israel. And this is when we now get the story being written about Jerusalem and Judea instead of Egypt, because now Egypt is the pariah state. They don't want anything to do with Egypt. They've been kicked out of Egypt on 2-3 occasions. And if you go into Psalms and some of the later books, you will find that Egypt is the pariah state. They don't want anything to do with it.
So they just rewrote it. They rewrote the story, and they located everything in Jerusalem instead of Lower Egypt. Right?
And I don't think they wanted to be pharaohs anymore, because remember, they, after the Babylonian exile, they had their new religion, and their new religion was monotheistic, and it was now solely 100% sort of Israelite Jewish. They didn't want to be associated with Egypt anymore. They didn't want to be associated with polytheism from Egypt, which they used to indulge in. They didn't want to be known as powerful oppressors. They had sold a sob story to the people, their own people, of being persecuted exiles. They treated us so badly, those horrible Egyptians. It's this persecution complex which sells so well to the people. It's like modern Islam, where whatever you say about Islam, they'll say, "Oh, we're persecuted, because it sells well to the people." And that's the story they sold. They didn't want people to know that they were the Hyksos and therefore the most powerful people in the Near East at the time. They didn't want people to know that they were pharaohs again within the united monarchy. Although the Tanakh does say that David and Solomon were quite powerful people. It was much easier to sell a sob story that they were being oppressed. And so they divorced themselves completely from the Egyptian history that had been their true history.
Well, how does the Roman influence throughout that period, at around 0, to 33 AD and up to 70 in the revolt, how does that play into the narrative too, as well, that they were trying to control? And I'm talking about Christianity, which happened a little bit later, but the Jewish revolt, how does that play into too as well? Because they're trying to control the masses at that time. I'm not talking about Rome. I'm talking about the Jewish uprising as well. Does that come into to the play?
Yeah, it does, because obviously this history was not lost to everybody. So there were divisions. There were many divisions within Judaism. In the first century, there were 4 different sects of Judaism who all had different ideas. And the sect that was the most revolutionary was the Egyptian sect, which was the Church of Jesus and James. This is why Jesus, in both in the Gospels and also in Josephus, is called the Egyptian false prophet, because they knew he came out of Egypt. And this was the sect of Judaism that had kept these old traditions. They understood the true history of Judaism because they were linked to Egypt. They were descended from the pharaohs of Egypt. They understood their history. And this was what caused the Jewish revolt and the big Jewish civil war, because you now had this war between the rabbis that were saying that they were purely Judaic and had always lived in Judea, and the Egyptian false prophet Jesus, who was saying, "Hey, hold on a minute, we were actually pharaohs of Egypt before," and he was trying to resurrect the previous dynasties, the Egyptian Judaism, which came out of Egypt. And that was the reason for the Jewish revolt. And he lost that revolt. And so a lot of this information got suppressed yet again, because the Egyptian sect of Judaism lost that Jewish revolt. And so it all went underground again.
I got
and
this.
It all went
well, I hate to jump. I feel like I'm interrupting you, but to stay on this on this point here. This question just came in. Define the historical record when it comes to David and Solomon. Do we accept the Assyrian and the Babylonian records?
Well, they don't really mention David and Solomon at all. So this was the whole problem with the David and Solomon story, that there was no evidence whatsoever until they found the Tel Dan stela. There was no information whatsoever that these people ever existed. And then they found this stela, which they're all raving about. But all it says is that the house of David. Well, that doesn't tell you anything about David and Solomon, apart from the house of David did exist. But these pharaohs, that was their name. He was called King Duat. He was called King David. Yeah, we know this guy existed. But the trouble was there is no mention of this dynasty outside of the biblical text, none whatsoever. So it's not until you get to the divided monarchy at later stages that we get some mention from the Babylonian and Persian texts talking about the kings of Judea, but that's much later. So we've got an entire dynasty that is missing. But if you look back into Egypt, they are there. And we know they're there because, as I say, I've got multiple points all pointing towards that conclusion. So we have things like the daughter of King David was called Makhetamar, and the daughter of this pharaoh in Egypt was called Makara Mutemhat. It is the same daughter. It is the same story. The army general of King David was called Joab. His most famous and most loyal general was called Joab. And the army commander of this particular pharaoh was called Joabinjed. It's the same name.
Right.
And this also takes us back into Masonic history, because Masonic history is based on King David and King Solomon and their famous architect, who was called Hiram Abiff. And the Egyptian architect of this particular pharaoh was Heru Amen-Atif. So now it's telling us what is not even known within Masonic history, because no one really knows who Hiram Abiff was or what his name means. But in the Egyptian, we have the very same character, Hiram, and his name is actually not Hiram. His name is Heru Atif, which means the son of Horus. So now we have his name. We actually know who this guy was. He was the son of Horus, and this was a standard Egyptian name honoring Horus, the god Horus, the hawk-headed god. And so now we know who Hiram Abiff was, who is the famous hero of Masonic legend, because Masonry doesn't honor King David or King Solomon. They concentrate on the architect of these two kings. And the reason they do so, because that was always a bit of a mystery, you know, okay, Masonry is to do with building and things like that.
Right.
But why do you concentrate on a minor figure instead of the king? Why not honor King Solomon instead? The reason it turns out from Egyptian history is it looks like Hiram Abiff or Heru Atif was the son of King David. So obviously within these families, within these royal families, they tried to keep all of the major positions within society within their own family. And so they were trying to keep the priesthood within their family, obviously the royalty within their family, and a lot of the administration, and why not the architect, the chief architect as well, being within the same family. And so I think the architect Hiram Abiff was actually a son of King David, and that's why he was honored. He was the next, in the biblical terms, he was Absalom, who was the son of King David, who tried to take over the throne of Israel. So there was a civil war even between father and son during the United Monarchy, when the son, Absalom, tried to depose King David and kick him out. And they had this civil war. And eventually Absalom lost and he was killed.
Now, what do we do with, and listening to this, it blows my mind. And there are royal bloodlines and monarchies right now on planet Earth, I'm not going to name names here, that claim bloodlines going back to King David, right? It's in their name. Now, yes. What do we do with that? I mean, is it based in reality or is somebody lying here?
I think it probably is based on reality. Remember when Queen Elizabeth was crowned?
I didn't want to go there. You can do it.
When she was crowned, she was anointed with oil in the same way that Jesus was anointed with oil. She became the Messiah.
Right.
The Messiah, or the Christ, means the anointed one. And when she went through her coronation, she was anointed with oil, exactly the same as Mary Magdalene anointed Jesus with oil at the house of Simon at Bethany. It was the same ceremony. And at that ceremony, while they were doing that, they played the hymn by Handel, is it? I can't remember who wrote it, which is King Solomon. If you remember that rather famous hymn about King Solomon. That's what they were playing at the time. Yes, there are multiple hints that our current royal families are linked in some fashion to these ancient Egyptian families. We have them coming into Northern Europe via the exile of Pharaoh I and Akhenaton, which we talked about earlier, which was the exile out of Egypt, which went via Spain up towards Ireland and into Scotland. And as we said before, all of these people were ginger, as I said with Ramesses II. And there are lots of people now on the internet all trying to claim that, Queen of Sheba was black and Solomon was black and David was black. It's all perfect nonsense. I mean, even the Bible says that King David was red. He was a redhead. These were the ginger phenotype. All of these families, these royal families, were the ginger phenotype. And then when you start looking into our history and across Europe history, all of these royalty tend to be gingers. So if you look at Alexander the Great, he was a gingerhead. If you look at all of the Scottish monarchy, of course, he was gingerhead. If you look at the Normans who took over Britain with William I, they were ginger-haired because they were not French. They were actually Scandinavian. They were the Norsemen. The Normans were the Norsemen. So they were Vikings. So all of our monarchy then were of Viking blood, and they all had ginger hair. Queen Elizabeth I and Henry VIII were all ginger-haired. If you look at my other story through Mary Magdalene, who ended up in the south of France, in Provence, I link her history down to Orange, which is the famous town in the south of France called Orange, which was an independent principality. And their monarchy, they had a monarchy which was known as the Princes of Orange. And their monarchy was eventually pushed out into Holland, which is why now the Princes of Orange are now living in Holland. And of course, all of those, just to finish this point, all of their monarchy are also ginger as well. And so it goes on.
Okay. Now, because it is now 5 o'clock in the morning and you're now awake over there, I'm going to keep you on for another 10 minutes. I need to take a break here because there's one other point that I got to drive home because we're now talking Holland. I knew you were going to go with Orange and move north. Okay. So we're going to do just that when we come back after the break, because I'm going to tie all of this into the Bilderbergs. I have a way to do this. That's right. Our guest tonight, Ralph Ellis. We're rewriting history once again here on Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Stay with us. More with Ralph right after this short break. Doing a little overtime, everybody. Stay with us.
Here, and you are listening to my boy, Jimmy Church on jimmychurchradio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will.
So you went to dinner last night, you had your favorite pasta. Ugh. Or maybe you had a heavy, spicy meal and it left you. Ugh. GetTheTea.com. Maybe you mowed down a huge steak and your plumbing is all plugged. Ugh. GetTheTea.com. Our super strength tea will take care of your occasional. Ugh. It's all organic and non-GMO. Get rid of ugh. We have so many great supplements, but our super tea is number one. GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roast it to the dark side of Fade to Black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from Rivermoon Coffee. Yes, Rivermoon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black blend from Rivermoon Coffee. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Go Beckley Tepe.
I'm Matt Ray with America's First News. We all know if you're planning a trip, you should shop and compare, right? But why endlessly search the web when you don't have to? Flight Services helps you find the lowest possible airfare. Talk directly to a travel pro right now for the best deals available. Their travel pros have additional discounts not found on websites, and Flight Services provides 24-hour customer service. Call toll-free 844-845-9944. That's 844-845-9944.
What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring two Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The two full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129 and use the promo code JCRTWS and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go Beckley Tepe.
Erica, Brittany, Gabby, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
It's not a lifestyle we chose. We were born this way. KGRARadio.com.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
All right. Doing a little overtime with Ralph Ellis. Got our knowledge going on tonight. Man, oh, man, oh, man. All right, so right before the break, I expected this, and I love it when Ralph does this, when we bring up Orange, south of France, and start to talk about that influence coming out of the Mediterranean and Israel through the south of France, and then those bloodlines that went all across Europe. And he had just brought up Holland. And Ralph, this is one of the trippy things for me was Prince Bernhard. His name. Now he was one of the founder of the Bilderberg Group, right? And his name, which is Bernhard Frederick Eberhard Leopold Julius Kurt Karl Gottfried Peter Graf von Bleisterfield, right? Claimed, claimed bloodlines going all the way back through Rome into Israel, back to the house of David. That's a pretty good bloodline. But here, right now, he Queen Juliana, right, of the Netherlands, father of Princess Beatrix, right? So, and a highly regarded guy, pretty dark figure, had his own controversial things, but nonetheless had these bloodlines going all the way back to the house of David. And you said there is some truth to this. Well, here is somebody that may have had those bloodlines, but also founded the Bilderberg Group. Now we touch into the Cabal and the Illuminati and the New World Order and everything else that comes into play.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't actually write about this very much because I never got onto the Bilderbergers in my Mary Magdalene book. But of course, this family were linked back to the Princes of Orange from south of France, and their royal standard has the insignia from that town. So if you look at the royal insignia of Prince Bernhard, it has two cornets, and the two cornets are the symbol of orange in the south of France. They're directly linked back into the Princes of Orange. From the south of France. And yeah, I think there is a direct link here, not only in having ginger hair, the same as Mary Magdalene did, but in her exile to the south of France and where she ended up. So her sister is supposed to have ended up at Tarascon, which is the next town just south of Orange, I think it is, where they have the fabulous Tarascon beast down there, some sort of thing that looks like a tortoise. And they founded, as far as I can see, that the Principality of Orange, because it has all of these links back to gold, orange, sun, anything that's to do, and the cosmos itself. Because remember, the founding queen that I trace back was Queen Aurania, which means the Queen of the Heavens. And Aurania has its links to ore, which means gold, in Latin, of course, and in French. And ore is the basis of orange because it was golden. It's the golden fruit. And of course, a golden fruit, if you put an orange up in the sky, it looks like the sun. It has a direct link with the sun. And the coat of arms of orange, of course, is the orange fruit. It's based on the same symbology. And this goes all the way through up into Holland, as you say. They were exiled there mainly by Louis XIV. They had a major battle during the Reformation, and this Reformation battle went on for nearly 100 years between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, and obviously Orange was Protestant. And this little Orange principality was the only Protestant principality in the whole of France at that time. And it was persecuted for 100 years or more. They had terrible persecutions against the Protestants in France, most of which who emigrated elsewhere. They went to Britain, they went to the South Africa, which was opening up. But eventually, a lot of them went up to Holland and founded the Princes of Orange up in Holland. And so we have this direct line through into Holland. And then, as you say, we have Prince Bernhard. This is the elder Prince Bernhard, isn't it?
Yeah, he passed away.
1934, it says here.
Well, he was Prince of the Netherlands from 1948 to 1980.
Yeah, that was the later one. But the guy who, as I say, I don't write about this, so I'm just looking this up on an encyclopedia here. And the founder, it says, was his father. And he founded the Bilderbergers back in 1950s.
Yeah, 58, I think.
Yeah, something like that. So, so he's now linked with the Bilderbergers, which is this, obviously, as everyone knows, this secret institution that has great, wields fairly influential power within lots of countries, lots of
dictates world events pretty much.
Yeah, well, they don't say that. Other people do. They say they like to influence world affairs, which is, I suppose you might say, it's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so they were the founders of the Bilderbergers, and they have this history which takes them all the way back, as far as I can see, into the line of Jesus via Mary Magdalene. And her daughter, because remember when Mary Magdalene escaped from Judea, she had a young girl with her who was known as Sarah, and Sarah just means princess, so she had a princess with her, and they were often portrayed as the black, Sarah especially was known as the Black Princess. And Mary Magdalene as well. If you look into the south of France, they have all these black Madonnas, which is not only the Black Madonna of Mary the Virgin, but also the Black Mary Magdalene. And again, people jump on this and say, "Oh, these were black people." Has nothing to do with that. The blackness just means they were Egyptian, because in Egyptian, Cam. The word Cam means black, but it also means it was one of the traditional names for Egypt.
Yeah,
Kemet
school, all of that. Chem is
all comes
black.
from Egypt.
Yep, yeah. That's right.
And so if you wanted, because of course all of this was heretical, if you wanted to indicate that Sarah and Mary were Egyptian princesses, not specifically Judean, but Egyptian, you just painted them black, and then everyone who was in the know would know that you were talking about Cam. You were talking about these people being Egyptian.
Now, what do we do? Well, what do we do with those that are Jewish, that are going to listen to this show later, or maybe even listening now, and are hearing about Akhenaton and Nefertiti and the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and that they would be their direct descendants and bloodlines? I mean, how do we soften that blow? I mean, the possibility of this, because it's certainly going to upset people, but it just may be the way that it is. Yeah,
I mean, it does. I don't know why it does, because obviously I'm not a part of this. I'm not wrapped up in this idea of Christianity or Judaism, so
right.
It doesn't affect me. But I would say it makes your history more interesting, that you have this enormous bloodline that goes back through Egypt, not simply just to the Hyksos, but maybe way back into Egypt before that. So you have this grand royal history that goes back into the very beginnings of civilization with, King Menes, who was supposed to be the first king of Egypt back in the first dynasty.
That's right.
I would have thought that would be more interesting than just having a peculiarly Israelite Jewish heritage, which goes back to we don't know quite where.
Right.
But you're right. People don't like it. They do get very upset. I get lots of angry letters and emails.
Oh, I'm forwarding all of them to you. There's no doubt about that
as well now.
But yeah, and you're right, because when you go back to Menes or Narmer, however you want to define whoever that first king was, if they were the first king, that's all. Again, it's the historical record is difficult enough. We only have so much to go on. But if that is the case, there is a starting point there where if we look at the other versions of the story, everything is in question. There isn't anything definitive. Right? So, okay, it makes your life more interesting. I'm going to try that reply.
Yeah. And also we have, the evidence from Akhenaton that he was trying to portray himself in the image of the gods. That's why we have Akhenaton with his, almond-shaped eyes and his strange triangular head and his strange
hips.
Male come female body.
Yep.
He was trying to portray himself in the image of the gods. And so we have a direct link back here to early history of the gods, where the gods were considered to be, we were made in the image of God, so we look like the gods. And this is the same image as they are portraying now within Hollywood films for the alien greys. So this tradition that was brought out into the open by Akhenaton is still being played on within modern television and cinema, where the modern alien god from above looks exactly the same as Akhenaton. So this is a long history that is still being played out within modern society.
Well, let me ask you about that. The architecture, the artistry, the carvings, the sculpture, the paint, everything that is all over those temples in Egypt was done with intent, beautiful, and he looked completely out of whack. And in fact, he was the only one that was like, look at Nefertiti, beautiful, right? And then you have Akhenaton that was different. Now, was it a mistake? Was it artistic license? Or was dude an E.T.? Is there that possibility?
Well, we know it wasn't a disease. Of course, traditional Egyptology tries to say, oh, it was a disease. That's why he looked like this. They say Crohn's disease or whatever. Mm-hmm. Strangely enough, Prince Bernhard had Crohn's disease as well. So there you go. There's another. Yeah. But anyway,
well done.
They say it was supposed to be a disease, but of course we know it wasn't a disease because, as you say, we have the bust of Nefertiti, who is very beautiful. We have even the bust of Akhenaton, which is perfectly normal. And then, of course, we have the distended features of Akhenaton and the distended features of Nefertiti. So they drew Nefertiti in the same distorted fashion as well. So we know this wasn't a disease. This was a sort of artistic fashion. Why did they do it? Well, I think they did it because this was the image of God. He wanted to portray himself in the image of the God. I mean, as a pharaoh, you were supposed to be the son of God. All of the Egyptian pharaohs were son of God. That's why Jesus was called a son of God as well, because he was following the same tradition. So Akhenaton would have been the son of the Aten, effectively. And so he was trying to portray himself in the form that he understood the gods looked like. So this was the form that he understood the gods looked like this. And he was portraying them as a humanoid type being, sexless sort of humanoid being with these big eyes and triangular head sort of thing. Which is pretty much what they're trying to do in modern television, which is all very interesting. And I don't know where he got his information from. I don't know why he thought that, this is how the gods look like. But I mean, this is what the Tanakh says as well. In Genesis, it says that man was made in the image of gods. And so if you take that literally, then the gods must look vaguely humanoid or something of that nature. So we're talking about a humanoid being. The religion of Jesus and James did the same. They were following the primeval Adam within the Gnosticism, and the primeval Adam was a humanoid being who was the primeval God who was the first man. They call him the first Adam, which is why, again, we have this name Adam in Genesis, because within Gnosticism, the first man, he was more God than man, and his name was Adam, the primeval Adam, and he was the proto-anthropos, the first man. So, yeah, long tradition, and it's still being kept alive today, by the sounds of it, by some people.
Do you think they'll ever find
in Hollywood?
Yeah. Do you think they'll ever find Akhenaton or Nefertiti, their mummies, some remains? It would be nice to get some type of DNA, analysis done so we could figure out a few things. But do you think they'll ever do that, or did they just get on their spaceship and go back to Nibiru?
Oh, it's possible. It's just unfortunate we don't know where they went to. I mean, they certainly went on an exodus. They were pushed out of Middle Egypt, out of Akhenaton, as they called it. Where did they go to? Did they go to? They had very, very close connections with Crete, with the Minoan Empire.
Right.
We know this because their artistry is exactly the same. Everyone says that Akhenaton was doing, wonderful things with new artistry, but that came straight out of the Minoan Empire. So we know they had great links there. They could have gone to Greece as well. They could have gone to the Levant. I think there will be found eventually, perhaps some remains of Akhenaton. He would have wanted to be buried in some style if he could possibly manage it. The only problem is if you go up into Greece and so on, the weather is not so conducive to keeping mummies. So, but you might find a burial and some artifacts that indicates that this was the burial of Akhenaton or Nefertiti. I think they would have wanted to preserve their mortal remains, as every pharaoh did.
That's right.
The people who went over to Spain and on to Ireland had an even bigger problem because they were then, vaguely poverty-stricken. The weather is not so, the climate is not so good for preserving burials. So I don't think we'll find much of Pharaoh I and Ankhesenamun because they went over to Spain and Ireland. But it's possible that we might find something of Akhenaton, but we're not going to find it down in Upper Egypt, down in the Valley of the Kings. We're not going to find it in Middle Egypt because they were pushed out of there.
That's right.
If they're in Egypt at all, we might find something in the Nile Delta, possibly.
I'm thinking Syria, Turkey. Maybe
it's possible.
Maybe Armenia. Maybe they went that far up and away. At that time, Turkey wasn't even there. So that was all the Armenian highlands anyway. But that possibility is there. I don't know. Persia?
We know that there is a possibility they went up in that direction. Because we have the history that some of these people went to Argos, they call it, into Greece. Mm-hmm. But also we have the boat that they found just off the coast of Bodrum. I don't know if you knew this. I think it's called the Aluburun wreck. And they found this ship anyway. It was just off the coast of Bodrum near Turkey, as you were saying. And it had everything that you would want on an exile. So if you imagine anything that you would actually want to maintain a new civilization in a new country, this boat had it. And it had all the raw materials as well. It had, raw copper and raw tin. It had raw glass. Everything you would need to actually establish a new society in a new land. And the one thing that dates this particular wreck is a ring of Nefertiti.
Wow.
And that boat was discovered about 40 years ago. It's in Bodrum. If anyone's going to Bodrum at any time, which is a tourist resort in modern Turkey, they've got all the remains from this boat. It's one of the most fantastic finds ever in marine archaeology. And so we know this boat was very, very soon after the era of Nefertiti, and it was going, by the looks of it, on an exodus because it had everything you would need to maintain a new civilization. So, it's possible that they were heading off towards the southern sort of coastline of Anatolia.
Or Orange. They went to Orange. So, Ralph, what's your next book? What are you doing now? You're going to change the world once again. What are you working on?
I'm not actually working on anything at present. I'm sort of consolidating. I've been doing a lot of advertising. I've got all of these books into the UK mainstream press, which was good. And we're doing the Arthur book next month. That will go into the mainstream press in Britain. Not had so much success getting it into the mainstream press in America yet, because that's the big market, of course. But doing a lot of promotion and thinking about the next book. There are lots of avenues that still haven't been fully thought through. I mean, even this Bilderberger business that we were talking about here, I don't write about that.
Right.
But all of those things, all of these avenues could be looked at if I had the time later on. So there are lots of places we could go to, lots of places.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for all that you do, and I just can't wait to get you back on the show again. We waited way too long. I just enjoyed the conversation so much. Thank you. And there you go. Thank you so much. And again, Ralph's links, which is edfu- what is it again? Edfu, I always forget.
-books.com.
Yeah, edfu-books.com. The links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. Please click and go get all of the books. And I got to tell you, Adam and Eve were Pharaoh, Akhenaton, and Nefertiti. There is the book, Eden in Egypt. Check it out. Ralph, thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks, Jimmy.
All the best, Ralph Ellis. Again, edfu-books.com, right there at jimmychurchradio.com. The links are right there. I do want to do a little public service announcement. I put it up in Twitter. Modern Masters and their podcast series that they're putting together, the first one that they're working on is on portals. So if you can contribute, please reach out to Modern Masters. All of the links are up in Twitter right now. You can also go to jimmychurchradio.com, hit up Rita either in Twitter or via email or Modern Masters, and contribute and be part of the community for the first podcast that'll be coming out on portals. Okay? I have retweeted it a couple of times tonight, but it is very important. With that, this weekend, I will be over at Coast to Coast. Tomorrow night, my guest is Richard Dolan. So that will be tomorrow night, followed by Open Lines. And tomorrow night, Richard and I are going to spend the show talking about false flags. So that's tomorrow night. And then Saturday night, my guests are Jay Widener, and we're going to have a Nazca Mummy update. So get ready for that. That'll be Saturday night. And then Mel Fabregas of Veritas Radio, and he will spend the rest of the show with me on Saturday night over at Coast. And it's such a cool weekend for us over at Coast. Yes, we are extending Fade to Black, and we're just going over to Coast and doing this. But when I spoke to Mel this week, and I found out that he had never done Coast, it just didn't make sense to me. The presentation that we did this week was so fun and so cool. That's exactly what our community needs to hear. So we're going to spread that word wider and further on Saturday night with Mel Fabregas. So you don't want to miss that. And again, very important, the Nazca Mummy updates that are happening with Gaia and Jay Widener, we will be doing on Saturday night. Next week, we have Jay Widener back here with Jay Dyer. That'll be on Monday here on Fade to Black, and we have an amazing week. Justin Duchamp is going to be here with us next week, and Ray Davies is going to be here on Wednesday night. There you go. No rest for the wicked. And the good news is, before I depart, I wanted to give everybody an update. Yes, our kitchen has been demolished over at the house. Finally, tomorrow, all of the construction will be finished, and we will have our new water heater installed. Can you imagine? We've now gone 2 weeks with taking showers down the street at a hotel. So no joke, right? So we're doing that all weekend. Construction over at the house, and we are working, and we are doing Fade to Black, all of that. Why? Because we love our audience, and we love the Fadernauts. I want to thank Ralph Ellis again for doing just one of the most amazing conversations ever here on Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Show is produced by Hill J. Paul, Mark D. Kovar, LJ3, Renee Jonas. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Fady by Dale. Webmaster is Drew, the Geek. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Music, Doug Aldrich. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA, The Planet. Thank you to Jon Rappoport tonight for coming in with his No More Fake Newsroom, and of course, the one and only Ralph Ellis. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2017 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's simple. I'll see everybody tomorrow night over at Coast. Until then, be safe. Go Backley Tappy.